Today, Napoleon Bonaparte is remembered as one of the most incredibly brilliant military minds ever produced. Known as the French Emperor and architect of the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon fought 60 battles and lost only 7 of them. Many view Napoleon as a force of good by spreading the ideas of the French Revolution, if only by conquest, while others compare him to the likes of Stalin, Mao, and even Hitler. We cannot deny that some part of Napoleon's acts and legacy did some good, but what about the darker side of history that has all but been laid to rest? Was Napoleon really a hero, or was he a horrific tyrant? Before we can begin our judgments, we must look back in time to the Royalist uprising of 1795. Napoleon returned to Paris to defend the city and help eliminate the uprising. The revolution was to end monarchical rule in France, but Napoleon secured the authority of the new government and its lasting 5 members, thus returning monarchical rule to the country. The coup d'état of 18 Brumaire brought Napoleon to power as the first consul of France. While this brought the end to the French Revolution, it led to the coronation of Napoleon as emperor. The Pope, Pius VII, anointed Napoleon's hands, arms, and head in accordance with the French's ancient coronation tradition. However, instead of the Pope placing the crown on the future ruler's head, Napoleon took the crown and put it on his own head. It was a cocky gesture, to say the least. While this didn't seem so bad after the rule of Louis XV, there's always a flip side to the coin. Instead of returning power to the citizens, he truncated the powers of the legislature, rewarding his personal supporters, and proclaimed himself emperor. Napoleon presided over a lavish court and showered his family with wealth and privileges. He also reduced the rights of women, ended freedom of the press, constrained freedom of association, and created a whole new kind of greedy nobility. Outside viewers could only see Napoleon's rule as a lavish lust for greed rather than the good of the people. Napoleon was a military mastermind. His most notable victory was the Battle of Austerlitz. Napoleon's 68,000 troops defeated an estimated 90,000 Russian and Austrian troops with an attack-based formula that played on his enemies' weaknesses. For 15 years, France lived through what is referred to as the Napoleonic era, an era in which Napoleon ruled over France as a ruthless, war-eager emperor. For 15 years, Europe was in a constant state of war. This resulted in an estimated 3.5 million to 6 million deaths and millions more wounded by the conflicts that raged on. Countless cities, towns, and villages were looted or burned to the ground. Women and girls were subjected to rape by the troops marching across the countryside. Napoleon's proponents placed the blame on other European countries for the Napoleonic Wars. In more cases than not, it was Napoleon provoking the Allies. It was Napoleon who chose to invade Spain and Russia and refused to take opportunities for peace when offered. He wanted war. He wanted to win. After his ascension into power, various threats were made against the first consul's life. Multiple assassination attempts were made throughout his rule. As a result of this, Napoleon abducted many well-known members of society and ruthlessly executed them. The Duke of Enghien and Johann Philipp Palm were 2 of many men to face the emperor's wrath. This begs the question, was Napoleon driven mad with an insatiable craving for power? Yes and no. Napoleon's rule over France didn't officially begin until 1804 when he was crowned, though his seizure of power began in 1799. The years leading up to the coup d'état were spent carefully crafting his military background. The massacre at Jaffa during the 1799 Egyptian campaign is one of many horrific conflicts Napoleon led. From 1798 to 1801, an Anglo-Ottoman alliance competed with France for control of Egypt. Napoleon claimed to have led the campaign in Egypt and Syria to defend French trade interests. The victory resulted in French troops withdrawing and helped safeguard Britain's possessions on the Indian subcontinent. During the campaign itself, Napoleon laid siege to the city of Jaffa in what is today Israel. Then, Jaffa was under Ottoman control. After successfully capturing the city, Napoleon's troops spent 2 days looting, raping, and slaughtering its inhabitants. This included women, children, and the elderly. Napoleon had also ordered the execution of nearly 3,000 prisoners of war, most of whom were Albanians. This was declared even though the POWs were promised mercy by Eugene de Beauharnais, Napoleon's stepson. The prisoners were promptly marched down to the beach and either shot or bayoneted. An estimated 4,100 people were massacred by the French at Jaffa. Surely, after all the pain, destruction, and death that was left in the wake of Napoleon's footsteps, France was left in a better state by the end of his rule. But what if I told you that was wrong? Over the course of the 15 years Napoleon ruled, he won a string of military victories that gave him control over a large portion of Europe. He annexed present-day Belgium and Holland, along with chunks of present-day Italy, Croatia, and Germany. He also set up dependencies in Switzerland, Poland, and other German states. Spain was mostly dominated by the French, despite the continuing guerrilla warfare there. Austria, Prussia, and Russia had been beaten down into becoming allies. The only territory that truly lay outside of the Frenchman's grasp was Great Britain. In 1806, Napoleon decided to place an embargo on the British as a sort of punishment. This would become known as the Continental System. But by the end of 1810, Tsar Alexander stopped complying with the embargo because of the negative effects it had on Russian trade and the value of the ruble. Alexander had also imposed a heavy tax on French luxury trade such as lace. Napoleon viewed Russia as a natural ally, despite the extensive negotiations and threats that preceded the peace between the countries. When Alexander refused to continue to uphold the embargo placed on the British, Napoleon quickly moved into Russia with his troops. He wanted to force the Tsar to the negotiating table, but Napoleon wasn't known for his peace treaties, nor was he known for his love of Russia either. In many notes, Napoleon referred to Russians as barbarians of the north. Tsar Alexander would either fall in line as originally intended, or Napoleon, as he wrote, would force them back into the ice so that they would no longer come to busy themselves with the affairs of civilized Europe. In 1812, Napoleon raised an army of troops from all over Europe to invade Russia. It was arguably the most diverse army Europe had seen since the Crusades. Experts believe that roughly 450,000 Grand Army soldiers crossed the Niemen River to fight the estimated 200,000 Russian soldiers. The Russian army was horribly outnumbered, but they refused to leave anything behind that could aid the French in their conquest. Towns and villages were abandoned, and military stores and bridges were set ablaze as they were evacuated. Peasants burned their crops to prevent them from falling into France's hands. The scorched earth tactics used denied the French army any sustenance. Then, when the summer heat came, Grand Army troops began falling ill with insect-borne diseases such as typhus and water-related diseases like dysentery. The city of Moscow was burned as the French marched forward. The residents had already escaped the city by the time Napoleon arrived, leaving behind hard liquor and very little food. By this time, his army had dwindled in numbers, leaving only 100,000 men remaining. In late November, after the early onset of winter had taken the lives of horses and men in droves, the remaining French army narrowly escaped total annihilation. It was every man for himself by this point. Alexander never sued for peace, and his determination to either burn or fall by the blade is what ultimately saved Russia from succumbing to French rule. In early December, Napoleon was forced to leave Joachim Murat in charge of leading the rest of the troops through Russia. Rumors had spread far and wide of a potential coup attempt in Paris, and Napoleon's presence in Paris was demanded. From 1813 to 1815, Napoleon struggled to keep France under his control. A string of conflicts initiated by Great Britain and other once allied forces broke through the gates of Paris. Austria, Prussia, and Sweden had rejoined Russia and Great Britain in the fight against Napoleon. In October 1813, Napoleon suffered perhaps his most crushing defeat at the Battle of Leipzig. By March 1814, Paris had been captured. On April 11, 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte abdicated the throne, and in the Treaty of Fontainebleau was banished to the Mediterranean island of Elba. Surprisingly, this wasn't the end of Napoleon. In 1815, the once French emperor made one last attempt at regaining control of France and her states. He was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. Had Napoleon decided against invading Russia, perhaps his reign may have continued far beyond what history could imagine. But his striving for power, wealth, and total control left France without much much of its original land, exhausted by war, out of money, and shorn of most of his overseas colonies. Napoleon's lust for war brought about his own downfall and exile.